Good afternoon, good evening. First, let me thank Michael Suarez and Laura Perrings and the entire RBS staff for inviting me to the Sol M and Mary Ann O'Brien Malkin lecture. It is such an honor to be here to speak about a very special book at the Huntington, the Yongle Dadian. This book is known in the Chinese language as the Yongle Dadian, and in the English Western world it is known as the Yongle Encyclopedia. So the Yongle Encyclopedia was one of the biggest bibliographical enterprises taken in any civilization. In fact, it was the biggest encyclopedic work ever created before it was surpassed by another monumental work, 四库全书, during the Qing dynasty in the 18th century. As such, the Yongle Dadian is a book project that symbolizes a great deal of national pride, scholarship, historical preservation, and emotions to the Chinese. And the Huntington holds a unique copy as part of the library's Pacific Rim and Rare Book collections. The curatorial focus on the Pacific Rim is a relatively new direction for the Huntington. In fact, my current curatorial position was only created in 2015. Here is a photo of Henry Huntington and his library staff taken in 1921 after the completion of the library building. Henry Huntington and his curators and librarians were responsible for building one of the greatest Western manuscript and rare book collections in the world. Today, the Huntington holds over 12 million manuscripts, 500,000 rare books, and over 1.5 million historical prints and photographs. Researchers from all over the world come to consult the collection, making the Huntington one of the most utilized research libraries in the country. Behind that usage number and the collection strength, it is not difficult to see a trend. During Henry Huntington's time, he and his curators were looking toward the east. They were looking toward the Atlantic Ocean, and not so much the Asia-Pacific region. For the most part, their scholarly interest was centered on the American East Coast and Western Europe. As far as the Pacific Rim goes, Henry Huntington was not interested in collecting Asian rare books and manuscripts, although a small number of Asian collections were purchased by curators during Henry Huntington's lifetime, such as the papers of Yone Noguchi, an influential Japanese writer and poet, and the papers of Emilio Aguinaldo, Filipino revolutionary and the first president of the Philippines. Still, for the most part, the Asia-Pacific region was not a curatorial focus for the Huntington until 2015. So as far as I know, it is likely that the only Chinese rare books that made it into Henry Huntington's collection during his lifetime. So this single volume from the set of I Ching, or the Book of Changes, an ancient Chinese text on divination. It was gifted to Henry Huntington in 1927 by William Bixby, a book collector who sold his collections of Charles Dickens letters, Thomas Jefferson's account books, and also George Washington correspondence to Henry Huntington in 1917. So when Bixby gifted this book to Huntington, he had identified the volume as a 10th century book and claimed that it would be the oldest printed book in the library. Bixby also enlisted a noted sinologist at Chicago's Field Museum to confirm the book's provenance. But after examining the book, we believe that it is most likely a reprint during the Ming Dynasty due to the distortion and the waffling of the print impressions. So let me get back to the encyclopedia. I still remember clearly the day that I came across this book on July 24th, 2014, in the rare book stacks of the Huntington. I was first informed by our former rare book chief curator, Alan Jutzi, about the existence of an oversized Chinese volume. Now, this in itself is not unique, as we often come across unknown Chinese texts in our holdings. When I first opened the book, I was struck by the beauty of the calligraphy written on the finest quality of Xuan paper, or Xuanzhi. This paper is known in China since the Tang Dynasty for its softness, its excellent absorption of ink, and durability. And when I turned over to the title page, I was shocked to find the 4 Chinese characters, Yongle Dadian. This unique volume, section or fascicle 10,270 and 10,271, was donated to the Huntington by Mabel Whiting in 1968. It's not clear which curator at the Huntington accepted this copy and whether the curator knew the importance of the book. The only surviving evidence that we have is a small 1968 paper slip stating the donation of a, quote, Chinese encyclopedia. No other forms of correspondence exist between Mabel Whiting and the Huntington. So how did this book end up in California? And who is Mabel Whiting? And most importantly, is this an authentic volume of Yongle Dadian? These were some of the questions that came up right after the discovery. And to be fair, I have not come across too many Ming Dynasty rare books in the library prior to this, but this book fell into my lap, and I went with my initial instinct and started to do research. After many educated and wild guesses, it eventually led me onto a month-long authentication journey that involved quite a few archivists and historians in both the United States and China. It also gave me the opportunity to visit the National Library in Beijing to consult experts and then also to examine their holdings as well. Before I go into more details about the rediscovery of this book, I want to give you some background information on the Yongle Encyclopedia. So it has been more than 600 years since the original encyclopedia was completed in 1408. The project was commissioned by the Yongle Emperor, the third emperor of the Ming Dynasty, whose rationale for the project was actually recorded in the Ming Shiru, which is translated as the annual recordings of the Ming emperors. Quote, "The world's affairs and things of both the past and present are recorded separately in various books, but there are so many and so scattered all over the country that it is difficult to locate and read them at one's fingertips. I want to gather all the books together, copy them, and categorize them according to both topical and phonetic order, and make research and study as easy as picking up things from a purse. You hunting scholars will put my idea to work and begin gathering classics, histories, philosophical studies, and miscellaneous literary works, and all other books written by the masters. As to the books on astronomy, geography, yin-yang theory, medicine, divination, religion, technology, and arts, you should not be deterred by their vast number or the tedium of the task, but should also classify them and edit them accordingly." As a result, the entire manuscript took over 2,000 scholars, editors, and scribes over 5 years, from 1403 to 1408, to complete. The final manuscript set consisted of 11,095 volumes that included 22,877 topical sections and 60 catalog sections. And the encyclopedia was organized by the rhyming system Hongwu Zhenyun, which contained 76 rhymes that was developed in the 14th century. Despite Yongle Emperor's satisfaction with the finalized sets, and that's why he named it after himself, there is no evidence that Yongle ever consulted the book. And historians today that are still debating about the real motivation behind this expensive project. Some have even argued that it was a vanity project that served to unite scholar officials and suppress dissents. Furthermore, there was never a plan to print the set for wider distribution or to update the set in the future. The encyclopedia was neglected for a very long time, and no one had access to it except for Yongle and his inner circles. It is also worth noting that Yongle Emperor was easily one of the most influential emperors in China. In addition to commissioning the Yongle Encyclopedia, he oversaw the construction of the Forbidden City. He moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing. He oversaw the completion of the Grand Canal, which is a artificial waterway that stretches to over 1,000 miles long. He consolidated the imperial bureaucracy and also the expansion of China's territories into Mongolia, Manchuria, and Vietnam. Now, let us fast forward into the 16th century from 1521 to 1567 during the reign of Jiajing. The Jiajing emperor was known to have consulted the encyclopedia frequently. A Chinese manuscript even suggested that he took some of the volumes with him whenever he traveled. But most importantly, he had the foresight to commission the only known complete copy in addition to the original. The Jiajing era copy, transcribed between 1562 to 1567, are the only surviving volumes of the Yongle Encyclopedia today. So if you include the Huntington's copy, there are currently approximately 423 unique volumes that are scattered in libraries across Asia, Europe, and the United States. And the bulk of it is located at the National Library in Beijing, followed by the National Palace Museum in Taiwan and the Library of Congress in DC. The whereabouts of the 15th century original volumes remain a mystery. There are many theories about the original set's disappearance, but none of them has ever been proven. So during the Qing Dynasty's Yongzheng era, from 1722 to 1735, the entire Yongle Dadian set was moved from the Imperial Library to the Huntington Academy, a prestigious library and academic institution founded during the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century. And this was the first time that the Yongle Dadian was opened up to more researchers. It was probably around this time that the volume of the Dadian started to go missing, most likely due to the results of internal theft by corrupt government officials. In 1772, a survey revealed that an estimated 1,000 volumes were already missing. And during the Second Opium War, which ended in 1860, many more volumes were looted by the Anglo-French forces. In 1875, another survey revealed the set had dwindled to around 5,000. In 1893, only 600 volumes can be accounted for. And then finally, during the Boxer Uprising in the year 1900, an unknown number of volumes had gone missing. In 1909, only 64 volumes were in possession by the Chinese government. For this particular volume at the Huntington, the key events were the siege of the International Legation and the destruction of the Huntington Academy during the Boxer Uprising in the year 1900. The person who took this volume of the encyclopedia out of China was the Reverend Joseph L. Whiting. He was born in 1835 in New Hampshire, and after completing his theology degree in 1869, he married Lucy Jackson, and the two set off for China in that same year. And together they were spent more than 40 years in China as Presbyterian missionaries. After conducting research with the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, no information about the Whiting's experiences in the legations was found. But fortunately, Whiting published part of his letters and diaries written during the siege in a magazine. Quote, "We have been cut off from all mail facilities for nearly, if not quite, 2 months. We know that some of the letters sent to the post office were burned up, but do not know exactly from what date to reckon. How much longer this blockade will last, we cannot tell, but hope not many days, as we have heard that the relief army are halfway from Tianjin here. I will begin a letter as I have just come into possession of some paper. No doubt you will have learned from telegrams that all mission premises in the cities are burned," unquote. So what I just read was the opening of the letter written on July 26, 1900 by Joseph Whiting. Along with 900 plus soldiers and civilians from Europe, from the United States and Japan, and almost 3,000 Chinese Christians, they were under siege for 55 days within the international legation in Beijing. During this period, the group endured nearly daily bombardments from the Chinese Boxers, with support from the Qing government. The aim of the Boxers was to drive all Westerners out of China as a remedy to cure China's ills. It was also during this time that Joseph Whiting and people from the international legation came in contact with the Yongle Encyclopedia and many other rare Chinese works. On June 22nd, the Chinese started burning buildings around the legation, hoping to smoke everyone out of the legation. The next day, new fires were started again, and to the surprise of the international legation, the Huntington Academy, which is located north of the British legation, was purposely set on fire. The British minister to Beijing, Sir Claude MacDonald, who was the leader during the siege, ordered a party of Marines and civilians to go through the wall of the Huntington Academy and form a line of firefighters comprising of men and women, soldiers, missionaries, Chinese Christians, and ministers to put out the blaze and to save as many rare works as possible. So after 2 months, the siege was finally lifted. The arrival of more than 20,000 foreign troops saved most of the foreigners trapped in Beijing. Japan was able to get its troops to China the fastest. The British troops came mostly from India. American came from the Philippines and San Francisco, and Germans traveled all the way from Europe. Later on, as the Whiting's family remarked, many of the saved rare books, including the Huntington's copy, were used to barricade windows against attacks. Unfortunately, most of Whiting's published writings did not mention the encyclopedia. When the siege was raised in August, Joseph Whiting returned to the United States and took the book with him to the Whiting family home in Oberlin, Ohio. His devotion to China did not end with the Boxer Rebellion, however. In 1902, Joseph Whiting was already back in China, first in Beijing, and then later on to Hebei province, where he wrote about the slowly changing attitudes of the Chinese toward Westerners for the better. He passed away in China in 1906. Between the year of the late 1900 and 1968, we do not know much about the movement of this book. The only documentation that we have is an undated typescript composed by the Oberlin College librarian and professor of bibliography, Azaria Roots, noting that the encyclopedia was on loan to Oberlin Library for an exhibition. And finally, one of the daughters of Joseph and Lucy Whiting, Mabel Whiting, moved to California probably in 1918. The 1920 U.S. federal census and other records indicated that she was a math teacher at the Santa Ana Junior College. Her mother, Lucy Whiting, came to Santa Ana to join her some years after she returned from China in 1914, ending her long missionary career. In 1968, Mabel donated the encyclopedia to the Huntington, but we have not been able to find any correspondence between her and the library. From 1968 to 2014, the encyclopedia sat on the library rare bookshelf on catalog and became part of the library's backlog of unprocessed collections. And in this case, it only lived in the memories of staff members who then retired along with the knowledge of the book's existence. After identifying the encyclopedia in 2014, I spent the entire month of August trying to authenticate the book. I compared our copies to a few online images of the book from the National Library in Beijing and the National Palace Museum in Taiwan. Together, they comprise the two largest collections of the Yongle Dadian at more than 200 volumes. And I also communicated with experts from UCLA, UC San Diego, Harvard Yenjing Library, and the National Library of China. After looking at the photos, they all agreed that this could be authentic, but it was difficult to say for sure without looking at it in person or comparing it to an authentic volume. Finally, we invited Dr. Liu Bo, a librarian and manager of the Dunhuang manuscripts at the National Library, to come to California to inspect the Dadian. And after comparing its features and characteristics to the ones in Beijing, Dr. Liu concluded that the Huntington's copy was in fact part of the Jiajing era Yongle Dadian that was transcribed between the year in the 1560s. In October 2014, I had the opportunity to visit the National Library in Beijing to look at other volumes of the encyclopedia, their conservation lab, and the facsimile editions that were made by the library in the last 30 years. So now we look into the inside of the book. So this is essentially the title page of the book. And as you can see, over on the top right, you started off with the 4 characters of Yongle Dadian, followed by fascicle 10,270. And then if you look over on the right, on the bottom, there are 2 characters, and the 2 characters are actually the characters signifying the phonetic order of this particular volume within the larger set as well too. The rhyming system that I mentioned earlier, the Hongwu Zhenyun, this is not a very intuitive system to modern Chinese reader as well too. For example, so in this particular case, the character that rhymes with this particular volume is the character zhi, which means paper. And then if you look over to sorry, I don't have a pointer, but over on the second and the third line, the slightly larger characters, 教示子. So the 教示子essentially says that it is about the teaching of the crown prince, the teaching of the heir apparent. So this particular volume is all about how to educate the future emperor of China in this particular volume by borrowing lots of other texts and sources from other Chinese books in order to reinforce the best way to go about educating the future emperor of China. So essentially, the character of zhi, and then with the 教示子, the teaching of the heir apparent, and the last character sounding as zhi. So they are essentially in the same category of rhyming category. And so that's how scholars using rhymes and also the topical sections in order to try to locate different subjects within the entire encyclopedic sets as well too. You will also notice that the ink, you notice that there are characters in black and there are characters in red. So the body of the text are all in black ink, but occasionally you might find characters in red, and the red are essentially footnotes of the book. So the ink, the red characters can be either an author or a book title borrowed from elsewhere. And the Chinese encyclopedia have this tradition of borrowing an entire paragraph from other works and insert them into the encyclopedic set as well too. So in a way, they were accidentally doing historical preservation by preserving an entire paragraph from works that may not even be in existence today as well too. So that's what makes the Yongle Encyclopedia such a special book in the minds of the Chinese. And also, at first look, you might think that this is a printed work because of all the frame, because of all the formats of the pages were set up to look like a printed page, but it is actually not printed. Everything is actually written by brush by over 2,000 scribes, and so this is sort of a very unique way of making a manuscript set to look like a printed book as well too. So we don't know why that was the case. Maybe just to make it look more official. But everything on the page, nothing is ever printed, even though woodblock printing is something that was long existed in China for a very long time. But everything is being written with a brush as a manuscript. We go into this middle of the book, and you can see that there are characters in larger sizes as well too. So the characters in larger sizes are essentially the contents from a very famous Chinese classical text, the Book of Rites. When I say rites, I mean rituals and ceremonies as well too. Because this is a book that was composed by the disciples of Confucius, so this is considered a classical work, and the editor decided that they were going to use the examples from this Book of Rites, insert them, and then make them, to emphasize them with larger characters as well too. So for this example, you have, basically it is saying that the ancient kings of China, when it comes to the education of the crown prince, they are using rituals, they are using music to educate the heir apparent. So the purpose of the music is to cultivate the minds of the future emperor, and then the rituals are to cultivate his conduct and then the way that he composed himself. And when those two intersect, you create the ideal person who is mild in manner, who is elegant, who he's also becoming a perfect example of someone who is going to take over the reign in the future as well too. So these are some of the examples of what this book is talking about. It is borrowing sources from everywhere in order to go into specific details about how to educate the future the future emperor of China as well too. And then finally, here is the ending of the first fascicle, the first section of the book. You can see that there is a clear ending, and then on your left side, you see the larger character. Again, this is the ending of the Yongle Dadian, Yongle Encyclopedia, and then fascicle 10,270. And if you flip over to the next page, here's the start of the second section within this particular volume. And then here you have the 10,271, so a continuation from the previous chapter. For this particular chapter, it is talking about, again, the teaching of the crown prince, but it is giving examples by arguing that when an ancient king named King Wayne, when he was a crown prince, when he was an heir apparent, how did he go about to behave the right way, to act the right way, to respect his father, and so on as well too. So it is a lot of real-world practical examples in order to try to reinforce the teaching of the crown prince. Now we get to the last page of this particular volume. And so you can see that in comparison to the previous chapter, there is no a clear ending. You can see that there's no clear ending, and it seems that we think that it is probably missing its last 2 or 3 pages. Again, we don't exactly know what happened, but we know that when Joseph Whiting was in China, this book was taken out from a burning building. It was used to barricade the windows against any attacks as well too. And we know that the original cover is not part of this book. So this book, when it came to the United States, it was already very much damaged. And so it is missing its last 2 or 3 pages. Then to conclude this part of the presentation, I would like to share my thoughts on what does this book mean to the Huntington. So after the discovery and identification of this volume, the most common question that I got was, does this book belong to the Huntington? Not so much in a conventional ownership way, since we have all the paperwork and documentation, but more so in that the book was taken out of China during the Boxer Uprising by an American missionary. So to this day, I still stand by my original finding, which is that Joseph Whiting saved this book from destruction. He took the book back to Oberlin, had his cover rebound as close to the original as possible, and preserved it in his family until Mabel Whiting's donation in 1968. He never personally profited from this book, and it was likely a sense of duty to history and to China, a country that he devoted his entire career to, that compelled him to rescue and preserve the book. But I'm also aware of the fact that while his individual act of saving the book was honorable, we cannot talk about this issue without understanding the colonial context that surrounds the situation. The 19th century was a difficult time in China. Starting with the first Opium War in 1839, Western nations, through the use of opium, military mights, and unequal treaties, forced China to trade on European terms, cede territories such as Hong Kong and Macau to Western nations, and allow Western missionaries unrestricted access into China. Western missionaries were not entirely blameless. Their forceful preaching of Christianity in China had divided local communities throughout. And at the time when Joseph Whiting and many Westerners took rare books and objects out of China, there was nothing the Chinese government could do because Europeans, Americans, and Japanese enjoy extraterritoriality, which means that they were immune from Chinese law, another legacy of 19th century Western imperialism in China. Extraterritoriality did not end in China until World War II. My ultimate concern for the book is its preservation and providing access to scholars. Ever since the discovery, the book has undergone conservation treatment, received proper cataloging, put on display in the Huntington's exhibition hall, and the entire book has been digitized and made available online. In addition, we have also partnered with the publishers at the National Library of China and Zhonghua Book Company to produce facsimile volumes, both scholarly editions and the paperback editions. Scholars have also done research on the book at the library and online, and a number of English and Chinese articles have also been written. I'm planning in the distant future to mount an exhibition based on the history and the movement of this book. Ultimately, I believe the book is part of the universal human history, and its ownership should not be determined by nationalistic rhetoric. By having the encyclopedia at the Huntington, which makes it the only institution on the American West Coast to have a volume, we are in a unique position to disseminate the work, facilitate international scholarly exchange, and encourage broader cross-cultural understanding in one of the most diverse regions in the world. Thank you very much.